Good evening. Welcome to Philadelphia Baptist Church broadcast. And we're glad you could join us on this Wednesday evening. And we are studying the book of Job. Before I get started, it looks like May the 3rd, the church will reopen. We'll be having services. And of course, there are some folks that who are elderly that may not be here, and that's fine. In fact, we encourage them to, if they don't feel comfortable or they don't feel safe, to stay home. Also, we'll be practicing distancing. We'll be practicing hand washing and hand sanitizer. And, you know, the only thing we're not going to be doing is checking temperature. I don't think we have one of them devices, but we're going to do everything we can to keep from spreading this thing around. I do believe that's important, not to spread the virus around. And so we're going to try to do that, have church at the same time. We have plenty of room in here for the number of folks that we have. Even if everybody showed up, there's still plenty of room in this auditorium for everybody to be spaced out 6 feet apart. And so May the 3rd, we'll be reopening services to our members. All right, this evening, I turn to Job chapter 7. And I think we covered the first 6 verses of Job 7. And of course, this is his second answer to Eliphaz. And we left off in verse 7. Let's read down to that and get the context. He says there in chapter 7, verse 1, "Is there not an appointed time to man upon earth? Are not his days also like the days of a hireling? As a servant earnestly desireth the shadow, and as a hireling looketh for the reward of his work, so am I made to possess months of vanity, and wearisome nights are appointed to me. When I lie down, I say, when shall I arise? And the night be gone, and I am full of tossings to and fro from the dawning of the day. My flesh is clothed with worms and clods of dust. My skin is broken and become loathsome. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle, and are spent without hope." Now that's what we covered last week, and Job is starting his complaints, and he begins by what he's likening his life to. Then we get to verse 7. We're going to read down to verse 11. He says, "Oh, remember that my life is wind. Mine eyes shall no more see good. The eye of him that hath seen me shall see me no more. Thine eyes are upon me, and I am not. As the cloud is consumed and vanisheth away, so he that goeth down to the grave shall come up no more. He shall return no more to his house, neither shall his place know him any more. Therefore I will not refrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul." So Job begins to complain. And he begins by likening what he likens his life to. And what we find is Job gives us 12 definitions of a man's life. Not one of them's positive, but there are 12 definitions. And the first one that he gives there, he says, "Oh, remember that my life is wind." Now, practically speaking, when you think about wind, I mean, the Bible says, "The wind bloweth where it listeth, thou hearest the sound thereof, but you neither know whither it cometh or whither it goeth." I think I kind of messed that up a little bit. But wind it's short. It has a burst of energy, a burst of something, and then it's gone. And he's saying that's what my life's like. But there's something else there. When he uses the word wind there, he's saying my life is spiritual. Because look in John chapter 3. In fact, that's where I was just trying to quote from and did a terrible job. John chapter 3, verse 6 to 8. He says, "That which is born of flesh is flesh, and that which is born of spirit is spirit. Marvel not that I said unto thee, you must be born again. The wind bloweth where it listeth, and thou hearest the sound thereof, but canst not tell whence it cometh and whither it goeth." I mean, that's what the wind's like. But he says, "So is everyone that is born of the Spirit." The word in the Old Testament for wind, breath, I'm trying to think if there's another one. Well, the word comes from the word pneuma, meaning spirit. And pneuma, we think of a pneumatic drill. It's something to do with air. What's another word for pneuma? Pneumonia. There you go. infection of the respiratory system, dealing with air coming in and out. So when he says there, my life is like wind, well, he's referring to the physical wind of just how short it is, but also it's spiritual. Look in Ezekiel. There's such a connection between these two, that between wind and breath and spirit, that you begin to wonder, it's not oxygen. I don't believe that necessarily, but the Spirit of God's everywhere. And in Ezekiel 37:9, this is where he's prophesying. He's talking to the whole house of Israel. Then said he unto me, prophesy unto the wind. Prophesy, son of man, and say to the wind, thus saith the Lord, come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe upon these slain that they may live. And it says there, so I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath came into them, and they lived and stood upon their feet, an exceeding great army. In another reference there, I think he refers to the Spirit. I'm trying to think where it is. Verse 14. Verse 13, ye shall know that I am the Lord when I have opened your graves, O my people, and brought you out of your graves, and shall put my spirit in you, and ye shall live. So wind, breath, and spirit are all used, as the same action there in putting life back into these people. So there's a connection between the two. He talks about all that have the breath of life. When you breathe your last breath, we say that you've given up the ghost. Well, that's, with the last expelling of air, that's it. Spirit's gone, departed from you. Unless you suck in air again, you're dead. You're gonna die. So, also James chapter 2, verse 26. James chapter 2, verse 26. For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. And whether you like it or not, you are a spiritual being. And without the spirit that God's put, you're dead. So when the spirit departs and you've breathed your last breath, that's it. Your life's over with. But there's definitely, it's a spiritual life as well as a physical life. But the spiritual life is the most important part of the thing. Anyway, he said that life is like wind in verse 7. Then it's like we'll give you these 12, and we'll go down through there and just take a look at these. A weaver shuttle in verse 6. We talked about that. When you think about a weaver shuttle, and in my mind, I can see one of these things working, how fast they work and weaving a rug or whatever they happen to be weaving. But it's back and forth, clickety-clack. It's just busy. And, it's so fast, and that's how life is. You're going back and forth, and clickety-clack, a lot of noise involved. And everything goes fine till the thread breaks, and then that's the end of it. Ecclesiastes 12:6 talks about the silver cord being broken. And when that silver cord snaps, that's it. That's the end of your life. But up until that time, it's just nothing but being busy. I think that. I think that sometimes I think, man, that's all we are is busy. And then other times I think, there's nothing to do, but that's rare. I think back in the day, I might have been bored once upon a time, but that's rare now. Life is just moving very fast. He likens it unto servitude in verse 1 and 2. He said like a laborer, he said, or a servant. And in the context of that, he's talking about laboring. We talked about this last week, that the laborer he's waiting for the evening, waiting for the, like the end of his shift, his 12-hour day, sometimes maybe even 14-hour day, but waiting for the end of it so he could rest. Not only rest, but wanting a reward, and finding neither. And sometimes life is like that. You get to the end of this thing and you're looking for rest and you can't rest. the elderly have such a time with getting rest. And you look for a reward, well, you know, all the money in the world can't make you feel good. If you've got problems, if you got things that are attacking that body or broken down with that body, there's no reward there. But it says like a servant. He's also said in verse 17 and 18, let me turn over there. I need to be there to read these verses. Chapter 7, verse 17 and 18, he says, "What is man that thou shouldest magnify him, that thou shouldest set thine heart upon him, and that thou shouldest visit him every morning and try him every moment?" So he likens it unto a trial. He says, try him every moment. You know, Dr. Ruckman said that the Greek word for sheep, now I didn't know this, the Greek word for sheep in the New Testament is probationer. Someone on probation. And someone that needs to be tried. When the Bible talks about, you know, running the race, or life is like a boxing match, it talks about fighting the good fight and that type of thing. So, you know, both of them are tried. We have a thing called a trial run. We have training, that type of thing. And it just seems like that life is nothing but a trial. You just go from one to another. There may be some lag time in between. There may be a respite in between. But you go from one trial to the next, one set of circumstances to the next. They never seem to be the same. I keep thinking that sooner or later I'm going to be wise enough to handle the things that I'm going to experience, but so far all I've hit is new things. If I ever have an old one pop up, I'll be on it. But it seems like you run into new things, you're thinking, well, this is new. Probably isn't, but it just seems like it is. In 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12, 1 Peter 4:12, he says, "Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial, which is to try you as though some strange thing happened unto you." And of course, with Christians, this is they think that if anything befalls them, it's strange. Well, the Bible says you're not to think that. God's always going to throw things your way. There's no way for Him to increase your faith. There's no way for Him to help you grow if He never challenged you, if He never allowed something to happen to you. And so God does allow things to happen. Then he sees how you get through it. And Job's kind of complaining about that because he says, you try me every moment. Because right now, it's every moment. It's not minute, hour, day. It's every moment he's being tried. And also, he in chapter 8, verse 9, let me turn over there. And I keep losing my spot here. Let me put that there, and I'll be. Chapter 8, verse 9, he says, "For we are but of yesterday and know nothing, because our days upon earth are a shadow." Well, you know, you might have a shadow portion of the day, but eventually that shadow disappears, and you know, it disappears with the rising and setting of the sun, and so is life. We are here today, gone tomorrow. You think about how many folks have come and gone on this earth, and I mean, how many of them are remembered? Probably very, very, very few of them. There might be somebody who remembers them, but exactly how many generations you think will remember you, even think about you? I mean, they might have you on a genealogy chart somewhere, but life's quick. And when it's over with, man, it's like it was a shadow. He said also in chapter 9, verse 25, he said, life is like a post. He said, "Now my days are swifter than a post. They flee away. They see no good." That's a term used in horse races. It's like a horse race. It's also what we call a postilion. A postilion is given orders, I think I'm pronouncing that right, and told to run with a message. And the thing is that you're racing around, but you're supposed to have a message. You're not supposed to just be running around with no message. And life is fast, it's competitive, and that's understood, but you have a message to carry around. That's what you have. You have a message from the Lord. In Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, as soon as I get over there, he says, "Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, is set down at the right hand of the throne of God." And that is, lay aside the sin and the weights. Anything that will hinder you from running this race, you're to set it aside. Not just sins. Some things God asks you to set aside are just weight. Things that you just don't need to be carrying around with you. It's like you never see a runner with pockets in his running attire. And the reason being is that anything he has on him is weight. And he's not to have any weights on him. I like Jeremiah 23, verse 21. Some folks are running around, but they didn't get their message from the Lord. I mean, let's face it, man. We talk about, this is, we call it the rat race. The human race is the rat race, and everybody running around. Jeremiah 23, 21, he says, I have not sent these prophets, yet they ran. I have not spoken to them, yet they prophesied. And so you got that. You got some folks just running around, but God didn't send them, and He didn't give them a message. But you and I, He saved us. He told us to run a race and run it with patience, looking unto Jesus. And He gave us a message to run around with. I mean, life's quick. He also likens it in chapter 9, verse 26, to an eagle's flight. I think I got the wrong reference. Let's see. 9:26. Oh, I got the right reference. Look at the wrong verse. It says he says, "My days are swifter than a post. They flee away. They see no good. They are passed away as the swift ships." We'll get to that. "And as the eagle that hasteth to the prey." So he likens it to an eagle's flight. And in particularly, he likens it to when the eagle is taking prey. And we have this expression, one fell swoop. That's your life. One fell swoop. Then he likened it to a swift boat. And one thing about boats, it's interesting when you're out on the water, and I've been seen the ocean a few times, but when you're watching a boat go out, 1 second it's in sight, then the next second it disappears over the horizon. It's like it vanished. That's kind of like how life is. Right now we can see you, but you're getting a little distant. And then one day, boom, you just vanish. That's the end of it. He likens it in chapter 13, verse 25. He says, "Wilt thou break a leaf driven to and fro? And wilt thou pursue the dry stubble?" He's talking about likening life to a leaf being blown in the wind. And the thing about that is that it's helpless. A leaf is helpless and at the mercy of the wind, and ends up on a pile to rot. Some of you do that with your leaves. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 14. I thought of this verse here. He says that we henceforth be no more children tossed to and fro, carried about by every wind of doctrine, just being blown around by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness whereby they lie in wait to deceive. And we're talking about a typical man's life here. He's blown around. All this coronavirus information, doesn't it kind of boggle your mind? I mean, 1 week you think you know something, and then you find out a week later that wasn't so. They tell you so many different stories, you don't know what to believe. And I believe there's a virus, and I believe it's attacking people. How severe it is, I don't know. What'll cure it or treat it, I don't know for sure. relying on people to tell us that. We're just being blown around by every wind of doctrine. That's just, and you're just going to have to trust what they tell you for the most part. I just trust the Lord with it. That's all I know to do. Just trust the Lord with it. Do what you can. Be smart. You don't have to be stupid. You don't have to, be like some folks who are going to defy everything that they want them to do just to defy them. I don't see that. I don't see that that's necessary. I mean, it is a real virus. I think so. Some people are dying from it. And I certainly don't want anybody in here to die from it. But I got to admit, I don't know what's completely real about the thing, what's not. I mean, they still don't know where it came from, or where it came from a live. It came from a live animal, and it came from a laboratory. Why? Because the live animal's in the laboratory. They collected these bats and other animals, and I believe that's where it came from. I believe it got out of the laboratory. I think God created it. I don't think the Chinese are smart enough to create something like that. I don't think we ever create anything. I think all we do is try to harness. It's like atomic energy. We didn't create it. We just learned how to harness it. And it's just like these viruses, messing around with something that shouldn't have been messing around with, possibly. And, the Lord sure did teach us a lesson, didn't he? He likens this to life to a rotten tree in chapter 14. We'll get these out of the way so everyone will come across it. We won't go through all these again. Chapter 14, verses 8 to 10. He says, though the root thereof wax old in the earth, and the stalk thereof die in the ground, yet through the scent of water it will bud and bring forth boughs like a plant. But man dieth and wasteth away, yea, man giveth up the ghost. And where is he? So, in Mark 8:24, the guy that was blind was being healed. He said, I see. He said, can you see now? And he goes, I see men as trees. That's kind of interesting. I see men as trees. And, Job likened it, a man to the life of a tree. One thing I do know about trees, I've got a few of them in my yard and had to cut down a few, is they usually rot from the inside out. Isn't that good description of men? We rot from the inside out. It's from within the heart that evil comes forth, according to Mark. I'm trying to think of I can't remember the chapter now. But one day, it just starts rotting, and it just rots from within, and one day it just falls over. I got about 3 or 4 widowmakers on a path that I've gotten on my property, and all these trees have just rotted from the inside and fell over. And they're falling over and they're resting on another tree. I got like 3 or 4 of them, So what do? I run quickly. Because I haven't had time to take care of them. I just run. I don't dilly-dally underneath the tree. But I've got about 3 or 4 widowmakers. And life is like a rotten tree. Then he likens it unto a flower in chapter 14, verse 2. It says, he cometh forth like a flower and is cut down. He fleeth also as a shadow and continueth not. So flowers grow in families, and God cares for them. Turn to Matthew chapter 6, verse 28. Matthew chapter 6, verse 28. And he says there, I must be in, chapter 5. 6, verse 28. He says, and why take ye thought for raiment? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow, they toil not, neither do they spin. And he's likening us to taking care of flowers. One thing about flowers, though, they're very, very temporary. The thing is that when God wants, he picks those flowers. In Song of Solomon, chapter 6, verse 2, we read this. A man to whom God hath given riches, wealth, and honor. That's not it. That's because I'm in Ecclesiastes. I do that all the time. Psalm Solomon 6:2. My beloved is gone down into his garden, to the beds of spices, to feed in the gardens, and to gather lilies. Interesting. One of these days he's going to gather us. I look forward to that. but life's like a flower. Then last of all, number 12, life's like a cloud in chapter 7, verse 9. Chapter 7, verse 9. I'm going backward here. He says, as a cloud is consumed and vanisheth away, so is he that goeth down to the grave shall come up no more. James likens it to a vapor. James 4:14. James 4:14, that's what clouds are, vapor. Whereas you know not what shall be on the morrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. No real substance, solid substance to it. And the thing about vapor is subject to the wind. And we mentioned that about being carried about by every wind of doctrine. The one truth that fits all 12 of these is brevity. It's short. And if there's one thing the Bible tries to get over to a man is, well, if you're going to get saved, you better get saved now. Now's the day of salvation. And if you're going to do something for the Lord, you better do it now. Because time could be up. That's what we find out. Paul summed up well the life of the believer. He said in Philippians 1:21, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. I can't think of a better description. In other words, without the Lord, really life's not worth living. It's disappointing. It's so temporary, and everything you work for, you lose at the end. But he said, for me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. John 14:6, Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That's the ticket. Jesus Christ is life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. You want to give yourself, listen, you want to give your, I think in the book of Acts, he says that he is our life. You know, how in the world can you leave God out of your life when he's the creator? He made you. He is your life. How in the world could you even think that it's possible to ignore him and leave him out of that? And then expect that everything's going to go well. And then expect you're going to have a fulfilled life? Are you kidding me? You've got a vain life. In Galatians 2:20, Paul said, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me, and the life which I now live in the flesh, that's the one I've got right now, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. When you get saved, the one thing that comes with salvation that is so wonderful is purpose. Because you can't talk to anybody that has any purpose beyond the edge of their life. There's no plans after that, because most people don't know what's beyond that. I have purpose all the way into eternity. The things that I do now have purpose all the way into eternity. There's not a lost man on the earth that has any plans past the last breath that he's going to breathe in his body. Man, I've got a whole plan right here of what happens after I'm dead or after I'm raptured. So it gives you purpose. The only life to live is just that. For me to live is Christ. Verse 9 and 10, he said there, as a cloud is consumed and vanisheth away, so he that goeth down to the grave shall come up no more. He shall return no more to his house, neither shall his place know him anymore. And it almost appears like Job is saying he doesn't even believe the resurrection. But that's not what he's saying. If you look at Job chapter 19, verse 26, Job states that he believes the resurrection, that he'll see God in the flesh. And this is after the skin worms have eaten him. In Job 19:26, it says, and though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh I shall see God. You say, well, what's he saying then up there? What he's saying is he can't come back here. Now, he's not going to come back to this place. And, typically, well, he didn't, did he? When Job died, the Lord sure did prove him wrong when it came to his kids. They did come back. And when Israel gets resurrected, in the millennium, they'll be coming back. So in a sense, he's going to prove them all wrong that they are going to come back. But general truth, when you die, that's it. You're gone. You're not coming back. Now, there's been some exceptions to that. Lazarus died, gone for 4 days, and then up he came. Now, he ended up dying again, and we haven't seen him since. But one of these days we'll see him. But the point is that, he's just saying that you don't typically come back. You don't come back here to your house, to the people you know. That's what it says there. It says, he shall return no more to his house, neither shall his place know him anymore. In verse 11, he says there, therefore I will not refrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. Verse 11 speaks of the true nature of man, and that is to complain. Now, if you were to ask me, I'd say Job's got more than a good reason to complain. But I got to thinking when the Lord was on this earth and what he suffered and what he put up with, and I could only find one complaint. And it wasn't to God. Eventually we get around to blaming God. You can be mad at, he's mad at his 3 friends. He's even addressing some of this to his 3 friends. But honestly, we're going to find out before the chapter's up that he's got his eyes skyward, man. He's addressing this straight to God. And ultimately, no matter who does you wrong, eventually you come down to blaming the one you think is the most responsible. And you are going to blame God because you know that God has control of this thing and he must allow it to happen. You know this in your heart. I'm not arguing with you. But I know we get around to complaining. And you know what? I might sit there and just shut my mouth and let you complain. Why? Who am I to tell you? If I were in your boat, I'd probably complain too. But the only time I find one complaint, I did find one. And the complaint was about man, not about God. Imagine the God-man, Jesus Christ, complaining about man. He says here in Matthew 17:17, and this is one of my favorite verses. Then Jesus answered and said, and I do this occasionally, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him hither to me. I laugh when I read it because the Lord is just, he's like, he goes, how long do I got to put up with this? How long I got to put up with you folks? Bring him to me. They were trying to cast out some devil and they couldn't do it. And he said, just a lack of faith. But you can see the frustration. We frustrated the Lord. I'm sure he'd get frustrated. He gets angry too. But he's frustrated with him. He says, if that's not a complaint, sounds like a complaint. Anyway, verse 12, we'll move on. He says there, now you got to remember his 3 friends are there looking at him. He says, am I a sea or a whale that thou settest a watch over me? And I had to really think about this one. In fact, my wife's the one that kind of made me see it for what it is. It's like a show. Job's accusing his 3 friends of whale watching. Now, you think about this. You hear about, this is a big pastime of folks to watch whales. And when they're watching those whales and those big whales surface, there's one thing they do, and they go, what do they say? They go, there she blows. And you got these 3 friends that are watching Job, and they're waiting for him to blow his top. Or he talks about, am I a sea or a whale that thou settest a watch over me? You have the sea, you put watches on a ship at nighttime, like the Titanic. I don't know what time they actually ran into that iceberg, but the guy that spotted that thing, I don't know if he's paying attention. I'm sure he was. I hope he was. But they end up losing 1,300 souls, if I'm not mistaken. 1,315 souls, I believe it was. Because he didn't see that iceberg in time to divert that ship from hitting it. So they have a watch because you never know what's going to happen. You might have a storm sneak up on you. So you watch. And it's like these three friends are watching Job just to see what comes out of this. In Jonah chapter 1, verse 4, it says, "But the Lord sent out a great wind into the sea, and there was a mighty tempest in the sea, so that the ship was like to be broken." It's interesting, that fella got swallowed by a whale. Kind of fits both scenarios there. Psalm 89:9 says, "Thou rulest the raging of the sea. When the waves thereof arise, thou stillest them." Notice that Jesus Christ said, "Peace, be still." But the same one that said, "Peace, be still," can bring a storm in your life. And the Lord watches those things. He knows where all those whales are. He knew exactly where that whale was that was going to get Jonah. So maybe Job is not just talking to his friends, he might be talking to the Lord here also. In verse 13 and 14, he says, "When I say my bed shall comfort me, my couch shall ease my complaint, then thou scarest me with dreams and terrifiest me through visions." And now I'm wondering, I'm thinking, well, this can't be, I don't think this can be a reference to his three friends, unless they're sitting around the campfire telling scary stories. It looks like he's talking to the Lord. And so the conversation turns skyward. Why? Because it's God who gives dreams and visions in the night. And he's scaring him with them. He's terrifying Job with these visions and these dreams. In Numbers 12:6, the Bible says, "And he said, Hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream." So now we can see that Job begins to aim his complaints at the one he is truly angry with, and that is God. And ultimately, whatever you're going through, that's exactly where you end up. You end up blaming God. You end up arguing with God. You end up complaining to God. And you know what? I think when you read this entire book, it's almost like, because Job loved the Lord and believed the Word, yes, he had a problem, and the Lord was rooting out that problem. And there's an exchange there in chapter 38 that's like no other exchange in the Bible between God and man. And I'm excited if the Lord tarries. Well, I don't want him to tarry. I'd rather read it up there. But we might get to it. We'll see. But just the interchange between them there that's going on, and God sees something we don't see. God sees a bigger picture. And when he finally challenges Job and he puts it on Job, Job can't answer him. Job can't answer him. So right now, we don't know. We don't see the big picture. We don't know what's at stake. So we complain. We complain. And a lot of times you got to be careful. If you haven't had that situation happen in your life, you might just want to stand back and let them complain. I think the three friends would have done themselves better if they would have just been silent and let Job rant. Because ultimately, Job is going to have to answer to God, who does see the big picture. I don't have the answer for all this. I don't know why all this happens. But I know one that does know the answer to that. And I just keep that in the back of my mind. Do I complain? Oh, I complain lots. I complain lots. If my hip's hurting or my shoulder's hurting, I cut my finger here, got a Band-Aid on it. Don't you feel sorry for me? And I could whine and complain, but I realize that, all this, God's in it. And I know He's in it. And by faith, I have to trust that He's letting this unfold the way He wants. Now, I can pray and ask for whatever. Change this, change that. And maybe He will, maybe He won't. But to know that just God's in it every day and every aspect of it. We have a lot better, we got a lot better revelation of what Job knew. We got a lot better situation than what Job had. Even though he's not under the law, he's under a period of grace. The law hasn't been given as a covenant yet. But he hasn't got what I got. I'm bulletproof. Job wasn't. But Job was 10 times the man I am too. In verse 15 and 16, he says, so that my soul, let me get it. He says, verse 14, then thou scarest me with dreams and terrifiest me through visions, so that my soul chooseth strangling and death rather than my life. I loathe it. I would not live always. Let me alone, for my days are vanity. Boy, you can start seeing it. It's coming. It's coming. He's starting to get bold towards God in his complaint. He says, just let me choke to death. And he's going to tell you down there what he's choking on. He says, just let me choke on my own spit, will you? He goes, just let me choke to death. I hate my life. Just leave me alone. He said, my existence is worthless. You'll be saying that? And there's many a Christian told God, just leave me alone. You just think you can't take any more and you've got all this stuff piled up on you. You tell God, just leave me alone. Just leave me alone. And I'm not going to condemn you. Hey, God didn't even condemn Job. Dr. Ruckman said this, Job lodges 7 complaints against God between verses 12 and verse 21, and some of them are so horribly logical that it would almost make an atheist out of a Catholic if he read them. You see, when you're looking from Job's point of view, from a man's point of view, there seems to be a logical argument about what is happening to Job. But again, yes, our complaints and bitterness toward God seem logical and right at the time. But we know that there's something bigger out there. There's a bigger picture. I made a statement here, but we are all viewing things through a very myopic lens. You know, you say you can't see the forest for the trees. That's about how it is. You know, you can see it, but you have to take it by faith, the eye of faith. That's the only way you can see it. I can see the forest. I can see the bigger picture because it's right here in print for me. Now, I have to believe it. And the problem is when this thing's going on and you're experiencing pain and discomfort and you're going through something that's rough, I mean, it's almost like the words are hollow, but they're not. They're the words of God. So my feeling about this is that when we find out the big picture, we're going to rate our suffering as nothing. And that is one day when the Lord explains all this, when the Lord shows you what was at stake, when He shows you that big picture that you couldn't possibly see. Well, Romans 8:18 says this, for I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. Think about that. He said they're not even worthy. What you've suffered, what you're going to go through, no matter how bad it is, He said it's not going to be worthy to be compared to the glory. Well, if it's not worthy to be compared to the glory which shall be found in us, then what about why God did it? We'll understand it all by and by. So Job ends here, and I'm going to read verse 17 to verse 21, and we're going to pick that up next week. But I want you to see, boy, this thing is, he is really upset with God. And he says this, verse 17, what is man that thou shouldest magnify him, or if thou shouldest set thine heart upon him, and that thou shouldest visit him every morning and try him every moment? How long wilt thou not depart from me, nor let me alone till I swallow down my spittle? Somebody needs a nap. He says, I have sinned. Now, Dr. Ruckman thinks he's confessing this. I think he's saying it sarcastically, because the way it's kind of presented, I have sinned, what shall I do unto thee? O thou preserver of men. That don't sound like somebody that's, brokenhearted here. I have sinned, and what shall I do unto thee, O thou preserver of men? Why hast thou set me as a mark against thee, so that I am a burden to myself? Most people admit they're a sinner. But you know what? He's not going to admit to this. He knows he's sinned, but he doesn't believe that he's self-righteous. Not yet. And why dost thou not pardon my transgression? Because if I've done something wrong, why don't you just forgive me? Take away my iniquity. All these are questions. For now shall I sleep in the dust, and thou shalt seek me in the morning, but I shall not be. One day I'm just going to roll over and die, and I guess that's the end of it, right? Man, he is. Can I blame him? No, don't blame him. Don't blame him. And his argument is, well, why don't you just do this, and why don't you just do that? Why don't you save me? Well, all that would come later, but when he's going through it, and there she blows. So we'll pick it up next week, verse 17, and we'll kind of go through that, and then we may even get into chapter 8. All right. That's it for tonight. Thank you.